So today we'll talk about Assertio Holdings Q3 results, okay? The numbers were very good. However, there are some pitfalls we need to be aware of. And well, before we start, nothing in this video is investment advice, okay? So, just to recall, Assertio is a position of mine. This is a pharmaceutical company listed on the Nasdaq, ticker ASRT. This stock has suffered a lot over the past few years, as we can see here, right? Assertio stock went from $2,000 to the current $9. And why did that happen? Well, first, the first drop, which is this one, starting in 2015. So this drop here was caused by the opioid scandal, which we covered this week. In this video here, is investing in Assertio Holdings a trap? So this huge drop happened because of the opioid scandal, when this company was called Depot-Med, and then the company started to recover. With a drug called Indocin. A lot of volatility here, as you can see, right? But then the company started to recover with Indocin. However, as we've seen, Indocin pretty much got destroyed by competition. So this drop here happened because of the loss of Indocin. However, as we've seen, Assertio is now recovering with two main drugs, Sympazan and Rolvedon, though Rolvedon is far more important and relevant for the company than Sympazan. Rolvedon is the star, right? The star of the show. But anyway, this stock has suffered a lot over the past few years, but I think this company is recovering. And now, well, let's finally talk about Assertio Holdings Q3 results. So starting with revenues, here, as we can see, Assertio's revenue has grown tremendously in the third quarter of 2025 when compared to the same period in 2024. I mean, as we can see here, Assertio's revenue went from $29 million in the third quarter of 2024 to the current $49.5 million, which represents a growth rate of 69.5%. So excellent number, though as I mentioned, there are some pitfalls we need to be aware of here, and we'll soon talk about these pitfalls. In any case, revenue has grown a lot, and for the trailing 12 months, revenue stands at $137 million. Moreover, Assertio also delivered a 72.4% gross margin, which is simply excellent. On a trailing 12 months basis, this number stands at 68%, which is also very good. And with that said, let's now talk about Assertio's individual drugs, individual products. So, starting with Indocin, right? Indocin. So, Indocin, as I've already explained, but Indocin was Assertio's former flagship drug. So, Indocin was delivering like $100 million in revenue in 2022, if I'm not mistaken. But certainly Indocin was delivering a lot of money, okay? However, new competing drugs started to enter the market. And with that, Indocin's party came to an end. But okay, as we can see here, Indocin sales dropped from 8.6 million in the first quarter of 2024 to the current 4.8 million. So we are talking here about a 50% drop. However, honestly, my expectation, I think that Indocin will probably go to zero. That's what I'm counting on. I'm not investing in Assertio because of this drug. I'm investing in Assertio because of this new drug here, Rolvedon. For me, that's what the market is not seeing about Assertio. For me, it seems that the market is only paying attention to Indocyn's fall. However, I believe that Indocyn's revenue will slowly be replaced by Rolvedon and also by Sympazan sales. In any case, Rolvedon's revenue went from 14.5 million in the first quarter of 2024 to the current 38.6 million. And when compared to the same period of 2024, this number went from 15 million to 38.5 million. So Rolvedon sales in this case have grown 157%. Now, why did that happen? So the explanation for that is here. As outlined in the release, Rolvedon net product sales were 38.6 million for the third quarter of 2025, up from 15 million in the prior year quarter, due to the pull forward of 2 quarters of Rolvedon sales through the wholesale distribution channel. The pull forward was done to ensure seamless availability to patients as we transition Rolvedon to our consolidated commercial labeler and we realign our corporate subsidiaries under a single operating entity. While this transaction will result in a temporary decrease in operating cash flow in the fourth quarter of this year and the first quarter of next year, we expect to maintain a leading market share and uninterrupted patient supply. Regular sales of the newly labeled Rolvedon will resume in the second quarter of 2026. In other words, what happened was the following. What happened was that Rolvedon's results came in inflated because Assertio pulled forward 2 quarters worth of sales. And why did they do that? Because they need to change Rolvedon's labeling. Rolvedon was still being labeled as if it belonged to Spectrum Pharmaceuticals. So now Rolvedon is being fully integrated into Assertio. And because of this transition, Rolvedon sales will probably come in very weak over the next 2 quarters, only returning to normal in the second quarter of 2026. And with that, the company expects to close the year with revenues of around $110 to $112 million. Now, if the company finishes 2025 with only 110 million in revenue, that will represent that Assertio's revenue in the end will have dropped, right? From 125 to 110. So considering that, we still have a company whose revenue is dropping. However, again, I want to highlight that I believe that this will eventually change. Rolvedon sales, in my opinion, should continue to grow, and for me, it's just a matter of time before the company's total revenue starts to grow again in an annual basis. In any case, the demand for Rolvedon continues to increase. As the company says here, first off, reflecting on Rolvedon's performance to date in 2025, we have seen a 42% third quarter year-to-date demand growth versus the same period in 2024. So as we read here, the demand for Rolvedon has gone up about 42%. So that's it on Rolvedon. The demand for this drug continues to increase, continues to go up. The third quarter of 2025 was really good. However, we need to keep in mind that the results ended up being inflated because the company pulled forward the sales of the next 2 quarters because they are fully integrating Rolvedon into the company. Now, that's very important to keep in mind, okay? Don't be surprised if the results for the next quarters come in weaker, because that's what is probably going to happen. Now, moving on, now talking about Sympazan. Sympazan, as we see here, didn't grow a lot, going from 2.6 million in the third quarter of 2024 to the current 2.8 million, which means that Sympazan has grown 6.2%. In other words, we are still in the same place. Moving on, the company finally delivered operating profits for the first time since the beginning of 2024, right? However, on a trailing 12 months basis, we are still in the red. Moreover, the company also delivered 21 million in adjusted EBITDA, the best result, the best number we have here. And in the end, Assertio also finally delivered net profits. Now, one interesting thing for us to note here is that though the company delivered net profits, its operating cash flow was negative, 4.7 million negative. Now, why did that happen? Because it's true that the company posted a lot of sales, but the cash of these sales will only come in the next coming quarters. So that's why Assertio's operating cash flow came in at negative 5 million. Now, to close this video, another very important topic is the change of CEO. In the second quarter, Assertio's CEO was Brendan O'Grady. In fact, I actually even interviewed him. However, Mark Reisenauer took his place and is now Assertio CEO. As he says here, this is my first earnings call as CEO of Assertio, and I'm excited to be here today. Now, I think that's very important for us, about his background. As you may know, I've served on the board for the past several months, bringing 30 plus years experience commercializing and launching innovative products. Most recently, at Astellas Pharmaceuticals, I led the commercializing of blockbuster therapies, Xtandi and Padcev. I also built and successfully scaled the Astellas Oncology franchise from scratch. That included enhancing market access and distribution capabilities, attracting and growing talent, and implementing successful product launches, as well as growth and life cycle management strategies. So as we've just seen, Assertio CEO changed. Now we have Mark leading the company, and I think this could be an interesting addition. After all, Mark has decades of experience, he's a veteran, and from what I can tell, he was leading $2 billion plus oncology drugs. So I'm sure he has a lot to add to bring to Assertio. So these were Assertio's third quarter results highlights. In summary, the numbers were excellent. However, we need to always consider that the company anticipated 2 quarters worth of Rolvedon sales, and as a consequence, the next coming quarters should probably be much weaker. But you see, the most important information for me in the third quarter is that the demand for Rolvedon has increased about 40%. That's what I want to see, the demand for Rolvedon going up, and also the demand for Sympazan going up, because that's what's going to make Assertio grow in the future. Well, that's it for today, and see you next time.